A husband sends a text to his wife. He says, "You're negative." She texts back to him, "You're a selfish, narcissistic, low-life, egotistical, mean-spirited weasel." And he texts back to her, "I mean your COVID-19 test." She texts back, "Oh dear, I'm so sorry." And that's the way that offended people are. They draw a conclusion before they have even understood the situation or the context. And they are just sore, and the soreness of their own offense attracts to them a negative attitude that misinterprets everything that is spoken to them. Tell your neighbor, "I know that person, I know that person, I know that person." Some of you are that person. But it's so great. And I love the positive energy here at Legacy. My goodness, what a blessing, what a blessing, what a blessing, I tell you. I love it, I love it. I'm allergic to negative people. Yeah, I only have two positions. I only have two positions, not one but two. I'm either up or I'm getting up. I've never conditioned my mind to be down or low down. I'm either up or I'm getting up. I'm either up or I'm getting up. And it's just a great perspective in which to live your life, to either just be up or you're getting up. And some of you today are on your way up. I'm so glad that God just hooked you up to something as a caboose because you're on your way up. You're on your way up. One of the great things about life is this. There's about a little 75-cent piece of metal that's called a linchpin. A linchpin. And you use that to connect a wagon to an engine, to a tractor. And it's not much. You can get it from a little hardware store, but that's a linchpin. And that's what older people are to our lives. They are linchpins. They're an engine. They connect us to something greater. Whenever you think or hear the word legacy, it's never just about you. It's about somebody that has done something before you and preparing a way for somebody that's after you. It really is. It begins to speak. And so we then become the connector or the linchpin that actually connects one generation to another generation in what God is doing. We connect them to the power source. So Pastor Steve is a linchpin. He's older than I am. He's my elder brother, and so I yield to him. You know, I've got all the gray, but he is technically older than I am by several years. He's in denial over it though, but he's living like an adolescent. But I absolutely love, just the energy. You don't know how incredibly blessed you are to be hooked up and to associated with a ministry like this. You're going great places. That's all that I can tell you. You are going great places. It's exciting. It's absolutely exciting. Well, the word of the Lord here in Psalm 16, verse 11, the New King James Version says, "You will show me the path of life, and in your presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Pleasures forevermore. I'm talking today about the path of life, or the path to life. I'm so glad that this is not into some kind of universalism, pluralistic kind of way that it doesn't matter which path you take to get to God, that you can go through various religions. This is called the path of life, or the path to life, and God is the source of all life, and there are not just 100,000 different paths to God. There is a way that we come to God, and He helps us in that. It takes leaders to be able to discover paths. Moses was one of those leaders that blazed a path. Joshua was one of those leaders that blazed a path. David was one of those that blazed a path. And so there are times that God will bring people into your life as a leader. They're trailblazers. I've explained to you from etymology that the word leader is actually an Indo-European word that actually comes from two separate words, Lea, which means finder, and then der, which means path. A leader is literally a pathfinder. So that over in Europe, during the colder months of the year when the vegetation is not producing, they have to hunt for the big game. Nobody tells them where the big game is. They have to go and find the path to the big game. So they look at prints. They look for little nuances, a footprint here, a footprint there. They look for a leaf that might have been nibbled on by an animal and say, hey, they went this way. Nobody tells them the way. They actually chart the way because they become a pathfinder. When Pastor Steve came here, nobody gave him a manual and told him how to turn legacy into what it has become today. You just don't get the luxury of somebody giving you a step-by-step manual telling you do this, you do that, you do the other, and then it'll all work out, and then you'll come into a place of greatness. I wish that it were like that. When Moses transitioned things over to Joshua, he didn't hand Joshua a big fat manual to read to say, listen, my son, this is how you deal with kings and obstinate people, and this is how you will be able to chart out new territory and take the people of God from further here into a land called the Promised Land. And he could just read the book and be thoroughly prepared for every kind of situation that could rise up. He simply said to him, as I was with Moses, I will be with you. Be strong and very courageous. Be very courageous. He didn't give him a manual, he gave him a God. Put him on a path to say that the same God that was with me will now be with you. This is the same thing that every mother and father has to do for their children. That you can't just give your children a manual telling them every kind of possible situation that will crop up in their life. But what you do say is that the same God that spoke to me when I didn't know which way to go, when I didn't know what to do, when I got tangled up by an addiction, when I was hanging with the wrong crowd, the same God that led me out, the same God that delivered me, the same God that gave me direction will walk with you if you call upon Him. He will be your strength and your redeemer. He will be the one that will bring you out. So that's what we do. That's what we become, leaders, a pathfinder. We become the one that will say, I'll take the same God and get on this road, and your road might take you around some things that other people didn't know, and you'll encounter some people that are different, but God will bring you into a good place, and it will bless your life in a fantastic way. You grow in your leadership. You grow in your ability to be a mother, to be a father, just when God gives you this leader capacity in your life where you are simply a pathfinder, because you don't really realize how desperate it is to find a path until you're first presented with a problem. And now you've got to say, how do we deal with this? What are our resources? What are the obstacles that we are facing now that we now have to find a way to be able to deal with this? How do we deal with limited staff? How do we deal with limited finances? How do we do? The smaller your resources are, the greater your creativity has to be. And sometimes the greater your connection has to be. And nobody will tell you all of this. You have to figure it out. That's why I like Pastor Stevie. He's got that same leadership gift in him. So he's thrown new responsibility, and it doesn't come with a step-by-step manual. Well, I can turn over to page 218 and then read it and figure out that I'm in this. You're just out here in the high weeds, and you got to find a path. And there's something, listen, it is not so much about the journey. Some people ask me, well, which one is it? Is it the journey that, that makes the man, or the man that makes the journey? It is the journey that introduces the man to himself. The journey will introduce the man to himself. The journey will let you know your limitations and then begin to develop a strength in you. But you never develop strength until a weakness is first exposed. God does not expose your weaknesses to embarrass you, only to strengthen you in what he will do. Is that what is a strength in your life, God will put that on the back burner and cause you to cover the strong eye so that he can strengthen the weak eye. So he will cover what is a strength in you in order to build what's the weakness in you, where he'll get glory, because God is glorified in the weaknesses of man. Our weakness is the very thing that qualifies us for his strength. Our weakness. When we are weak, then he is strong. You have to be weak to qualify for God's strength. Lord, I'm weak. I don't understand how to do this. Lord, I don't know what to do with this child now that they are talking back to me. Jesus, this is not the son that you promised me. This is not the daughter that you... I don't recognize them. And it's coming back to that place to where we said, Jesus, a weakness has been exposed so that he can develop strength. God is up to something. He's got some things planted on the journey to be able to develop you. There are all kinds of things. I want you to think of this thing like a treasure map. I used to do these kinds of things, where you take a line and you draw it all the way and you have to figure out it's coming through a maze. And this particular maze has all of these wiggly lines, and if you go this way, you'll come to a dead end and you have to back up and you have to figure out how to get it to the center. That's the way sometimes life is with God. And you'll go down roads and you'll figure out this is a dead end. You'll go down this one and you'll figure this out. And sometimes it's not even about that was a dead end. It's like, what was God trying to get out of you in the process of the journey? Because the journey helps to expose the man to himself, the woman to herself, so that the weaknesses that are in you can be exposed so that God can develop the strength in you. And that's why people like Maya Angelou said, I wouldn't take nothing for my journey. It may not have been grammatically correct, but we understand exactly what she meant, that I wouldn't take anything for my journey, because it's my journey that made me who I am, that taught me how to pray, that built a strength and a confidence in me to be able to do what God called me to do. Because when I started out, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where my help was coming from. And I got introduced to God in a different way. Problems are an invitation to a deeper relationship with God. And so he's doing something as he brings us on this journey called life. And the greatest lessons of life are not learned in a course, they are learned on a course. So God has us on a course. It's called the path of life. It's the path of life. And we don't want to get derailed on the path to life or the path of life, because the path of life, ultimately, when you follow God, it leads you into his presence. It brings us into the presence of God. Back in the Old Testament, they always built the temples of God up on a high place. So you had to ascend into the hill of the Lord. And here was the deal about it. They always built the steps ascending up to the temple different dimensions. Our building codes now will make us where you have to have every step has to be like 7 inches or 8 inches or 9 inches, whatever it is, but it has to be consistently the same. You know why? So that your kinesthetic sense kicks in. That's why you don't have to look at every step when you're walking up steps. And remember this, the steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, Psalm 37:23. But he delighteth in his way. The steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord. The steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord. They're ordered. But these steps, when the Bible talks about the steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, it's not just steps in terms of one foot in front of the other. Steps are designed for escalation. They take you up. And the reason that they built the steps leading up to the temple, to the holy mountain of God, different dimensions, is so that nobody could approach it flippantly and carelessly. You had to approach the place of worship of God with great care and intentionality, watching each step. He didn't want you to mindlessly stumble into worship. He wanted you to look deliberately and calculate every movement, that I know where I'm going. I know why I'm going. I know who I'm going to worship as I get there. I don't want you to just casually waltz in blindly where you don't even have to think about what you're doing, because if you tried that in their temple, you would stumble coming into the house of God. You had to ascend in it, and you had to look carefully at each step because they were different dimensions. This step was 7 inches, the next one was 9 inches, the next one was 8, and you would stumble because it would confuse your kinesthetic sense, and so it made you walk with intentionality. So what if God now puts things in your life so that you never take Him for granted? Because here's a principle that whatever you take for granted will soon be taken away. Whatever you take for granted will soon be taken away. Sometimes whoever you take for granted will soon be taken away. We should never take Him for granted. We walk with Him day by day. We walk with Him day by day by day. And here's the thing is that paths, they lead us into this place that we learn the plans of God, because paths always involve plans. There wouldn't be a path someplace if God didn't have a plan in getting you from point A to point B. I don't care where you said that you want to go. Once you decide where you want to go, now you have to create a path as to how I'm going to get there. If I want to be a doctor, a dentist, if I want to be, a CPA, if I want to be a school teacher, if I want to be, work in the hair industry, it doesn't matter. Once I decide where I want to go, now I create the plan as to how I'm going to get there. So a plan is only necessary when you've got a path, or a path is necessary when you have a plan. So paths often involve plans. There's a plan that's involved. That's why God said in Jeremiah 29:11, I know the plans that I have for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And we know that from Ephesians 3:20 that He's able to do exceedingly, abundantly, and above all that you can ask or think. So God's plan for us is greater than our plan for ourselves, and He will always discombobulate your plan. Things rarely ever go fully according to plan. And I'm just here to tell you that more will happen over the course of the journey of your life, of where you will stumble into it, as it were, because God planted something in your journey that you had no idea that He would ever plant. If somebody asked me what I have thought that God will have done in my life, what He has done, I never, ever would have thought it. Never would I have ever thought it. My mindset would have been too small. It has amazed me, the places that He's taken me. I bet if somebody asked Pastor Steve, had you ever thought when you were a teenager that you would be in the place of influence and the place of leadership that God has brought you to be now, and the things that God has delivered under the stewardship of your leadership, you couldn't have imagined it. It's just amazing what God has for us. And I think that God withholds some of this information because it would overwhelm us if He gave it to us too early. He wants us to trust Him. God wants us to trust Him, and He commands us to trust Him. Trust in the Lord. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. He'll show you the way. He'll show you the path. That means that there's more than one path. And so if we don't have the divine guidance of God speaking, listening for that voice says, this is the way. Sometimes it's just a nudge that God puts something in your spirit saying, I think that this is a divine opportunity, and you have to be able to recognize it, that this is God's path. The path sometimes unfolds. You never could have known it on your own. You never could have planned it sometimes as good as God has it to fall out for the furtherance of the gospel. The Apostle Paul says, the things that have happened to me in the book of Philippians, the things, he said, that have happened to me have happened for the furtherance of the gospel. That word furtherance means to make the road longer, to make the road longer for someone else. It means that God's going to take you farther than you could have ever have imagined on your own. And as you trust him, he's got a plan. God has a plan. And I want to help you to realize this, that before you ever had a problem, God already had a plan. Before you had a problem, God had a plan. God had a plan. God had a plan. God knew that the man would be lonely in the garden, so he gave him somebody to nag him. He said, I'm going to give you somebody that's going to have a different opinion. They're going to have a different side. They're going to be able to see them. So when you see this, they'll see that. And he said, and it will challenge and vex your soul at times. And sometimes you don't know whether you want to love them or leave them, but you can't live with them and you can't live without them. He said, I'm going to put you in a conundrum to where you will wonder, God, are you sure? And you'll be saying the same thing. The woman that thou gavest me, the man that thou gavest me. And you're wondering and second guessing God, but God's got a plan, because every path involves a plan. Every path involves a purpose. Every path involves purpose. It involves plans and it involves purpose. God is a God of purpose. Everything that God does with purpose, for purpose, and on purpose. God is a very intentional God. There are no accidents in the economy of God. There are no accidents. Everything that happens in your life, God will work it for your good. I'm a firm believer of that. Even if the devil brought it, God can use it. Everything I've come to learn now, everything is either God sent or God used. And even if the devil brought it, I'm going to get some glory out of it. Even if the devil traps a young girl, I've had to help them to see the glory of God in it, because a young woman gets pregnant out of wedlock. And I say to her, honey, you were not the first, you won't be the last. And the devil has now brought shame and guilt and dirtiness and unworthiness and inadequacy in you. But I said, listen, you can come into a purpose of serving God now and then raise up that seed to be the devil's worst nightmare. That what was meant for evil, now the transcendent glory of God comes on it, and God will turn it around and use it for his good. God's got a purpose in it. Yes, he does. He'll use it for his glory. God will use it for his glory and for your good. For his glory and for your good. It's for his glory and it's for your good. He'll work it for your good and for his glory. God's going to get glory out of your life. There is glory in every story. I don't care how negative it is. I don't care how dark it is. I don't care how demonic it is. I don't care how many addictions it involves. I don't care about your prison record and your credit score and how many hearts that you've broken along the way, the carnage that you have created. There is good and glory in your story. If you trust him, if you walk with him, that's not the end. It's just a bend. It's not the end of the road. It's a bend in the road. And if you walk with God, you will be amazed that he will bring you before great people. He'll give you a voice of influence. And I'm telling you, the favor of God opens doors, but influence changes nations. And God begins to shift and to change some things for your good and for his glory. And so the path of life brings you into brand new purposes. It unveils God's incredible plans for your life. But every path in its ordinary way is beaten in order to bring you to a new place. A path is about a place. It takes you somewhere. And when you really take the path, it might seem like a winding path, but oftentimes paths are shortcuts that help you to avoid some other things, yet there are dangers that lurk in every shortcut. And sometimes the shortest cut tends to be the longest journey. And sometimes those little rabbit trails called paths that we go down teach us some of the greatest lessons of life. And they're the things that add some of the greatest value to you. And you will never, ever forget the things that you have learned out on one of those little paths that you had to go out of your way. I discovered when I met my wife and that I was busy doing the work of the Lord in my public high school. I was 16 years old. And I had an organization in my high school that was my path. was to be able to serve God in a secular school, and that was my assignment. That was my mission field, to be a light for Jesus Christ among 2,000 students that were secular in mindset. I had parents that came and challenged me because I had a Christian organization there in a public school. And I said to them, I said, excuse me, but as long as the devil is here, as long as we have fighting and profanity and folks getting pregnant out of wedlock and people killing themselves, as long as the devil's works are here, I said the works of God have a right to be here. And I refused to leave. And then God said, because you've been faithful over this organization, I'll make you president of the whole student body. And he did. And I became president of the student body of all 2,000 students. And I brought all of them into an assembly. And walking in line, he that winneth souls is wise. And without ever quoting a scripture, I took the principles of scripture and disguised them, and preached to 2,000 students, and many of my classmates, schoolmates, and my teachers are members of my local church today because that was part of my journey. It is amazing. It is absolutely amazing what God has planted on your journey. It's to lead you to a place. It's not only about plans, it's not only about purpose, it's also about a place. A path leads to a place. A path leads to a place. When God gives you a path to success, it's leading to a place. It leads somewhere. It's the path to life. Really living, not the appearance of living, not artificial living with filters and lies on TikTok and Instagram and Clubhouse. I'm not talking about contrived images of how you want people to perceive your little perfect little world to be. I'm talking about real life, where you can respect yourself in the evening and lay your head on your pillow without shame, and where you don't have to hide your secrets, but you say, Lord, I thank you that I am accepted in the beloved. It's a difference when you can live an authentic life, because I'm on a path. He brought you into a place, and he introduces you to people. A path is always about people. It's about plans, it's about purpose, it's about a place, and it's about people. God had a plan for Legacy Church. God has a purpose for Legacy Church. Legacy Church is a place, and Legacy Church is a people. Now is the time, here's the place, and you are the people. You're the people, you're the people. Every path, when you see a path, it's about somebody that has come before you. And if you're the one that's called to blaze the path, it's about the people that's going to follow you. This thing is about people. This thing is about people. It's about people. People can be your greatest blessing, and people can be your greatest curse. And that's why it takes on this journey called life discernment, because all that it takes is one demon to bring into your life to derail your life. Just one, just one, just one. And that's why you need to look at every person that comes into your circle and ask yourself, is this a Peter or is this a Judas? Peter had a bad day, but Judas had a bad heart. If you got a Peter, you restore a Peter when Peter repents. But if you got a Judas, you release Judas into his destiny. And so you have to look at everybody that comes into your life and say, is this a Peter or is this a Judas? Because Peter has a bad day. Judas has a bad heart. And Peter, you restore. Judah, you release. And it brings you into this place of victory, of where you're just brought into it. The Bible talks about in Proverbs that there is a way that seems right to a man in his own eyes, but the end thereof is destruction. Not every way. You can't just live your own truth. We don't have the luxury of just creating our own truth. It's only the truth. Truth is not subjective. It is not subjective. May I remind you of this, that not everything that is legal is right. Just because the government approves it doesn't mean that it's right in the eyes of God ethically and morally. Only God, when you're on the path with Him, gives us peace on this journey. I love the fact that the path of God brings us into the presence of God, and in that presence there is fullness of joy. Listen, the joy of the Lord is our strength. It's our strength. Nehemiah 8:10, the joy of the Lord is our strength. The path leads you to that mature joy. Happiness depends on what happens. Joy is constant despite what happens. You can be behind on your taxes and you can still have the joy of the Lord. You can be in a bad relationship and you can still have the joy of the Lord. I mean, joy is that constant thing that is in your soul that the world did not give to you, and the world has no power to take away from you, because that's a God quality, that's a God trait. And as long as you stay on the path that leads you into His presence, there will be fullness of joy. It's not fake joy, it's full joy. It's not fake joy, it's full joy. And it so interests me that how the church is called, because we've been in a slumber, but God is calling the church and said, awake, awake. And see, the world thinks that they awoke. But we as the people of God arise. We awake, and then we arise, and then we achieve. You awake, you arise, and you achieve. And there's a difference between awaking, because awakening comes from being sensitive to the voice of God. God is the one who awakes us. But people who think that they awoke deal with secular humanism and man's thoughts and whys. And so that's why they change something that was wrong in 1960 and is now accepted and celebrated. It's not that truth has changed. And God's going to bring us to a place of accountability to say, did you hold to my truth? Did you hold to my truth on my path where there was fullness of joy? It reminds me, in one of the theses that I did a number of years ago on life after life, I studied a lot of the material of Dr. Raymond Moody, a medical doctor and a PhD, who had studied over 3,000 cases of people that had died and come back. They'd been, their heart stopped and they had been revived, and the experiences that they had. And most of them, of course, you've heard where they see this light and they go through this tunnel, they feel all of this peace and love and all of that. But what really stood out to me was one man's experience, a middle-aged white guy on the emergency room table who codes. And when the doctors get the defibrillators, they put the gel there and they put the defibrillators on his chest and holler to everyone in the room, clear. And then they, pow, jump his heart back. And when this man came back, he didn't talk about a beautiful light that he felt and love and peace. His eyes were big as saucers. His body grew tense. And he was screaming to the top of his lungs, "Doctor, doctor, I'm in hell, I'm in hell. Don't let me go back to that place." And this old doctor that was working on him had never had a patient do that, ever. He grabbed the doctor's arm. "Doctor, don't let me go back to that place. I'm in hell." And they kept working on him, and his heart stopped again. His spirit left him. They got the defibrillators again and put it on his chest, and pow, brought him back. When he comes back a second time, his eyes once again big. "Doctor, I'm in hell. I'm in hell. Don't let me go back to that terrible place." And the horror that was in his voice, the tension that was in his body, was so electrifying, it shook the doctor. He was a Presbyterian man. And he said, "Doctor, whatever you do, don't let me go back to that place." He said, "Pray for me, doctor. Pray for me, doctor." This doctor was not a member of Legacy. He didn't know how to do warfare in the spirit. He didn't know how to take authority against spirits and demons, powers and principalities, binding and loosing. But he did have a genuine heart to want to help a man that was in distress, and he didn't know what he was doing and what he was saying, but his heart was right. And he prayed a simple prayer: "Dear Lord, help this man who needs your mercy, who's crying out for your grace. May he have an encounter with you, and may you save his soul. And all of a sudden, this man that was still tense and screaming, all of a sudden his body relaxed. And all of his vitals stabilized. And it changed the life of that doctor. It showed him right then and there, not everybody sees the light and goes through this wonderful tunnel and feels all of this love. There is a heaven to gain and a hell to shun. And sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. But the good news of the gospel is this, is that you don't really go to hell because you were wrong. You go to hell for the sin of rejecting Jesus and failing to get right while you have a chance. And he wants to put us on a road that you're brought to him. And he's calling you. I'm telling you, we're called to this road. He calls us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Peter received a call to follow Jesus. Paul received a call on the Damascus road to follow him. And if you're ever going to follow him on that road, the path that leads to life, is because you respond to a call. And I just came to remind you today, he knows your name. And he's calling you. He's calling you. He's calling you. He's calling you today. Bow your heads. If you're in this place, I want you to just listen in the Spirit, because he's calling you. He knows your name. Can you guys sing a little bit more of that he knows my name? He knows your name. And he wants to call you out of your sin into his presence.
He knows my name.